All right, so last video for the week, we're going to focus on this video about how the Crusades helped to catalyze the start of what many historians consider to be the first international financial institution, the first big bank, and that is the Knights Templar. So let's just make sure that we have a good hold on the context. So over here we have our timeline. It's occurring during the High Middle Ages. In other videos we saw the first crusade start at the end of the 11th century, start of the 12th century. They were really started because Pope Urban II made a call to people and said, we need to help the Byzantines take land from the Muslims, especially the Holy Land. The First Crusade is for the most part successful. However, they don't return any of that land that they take in the Holy Land to the Byzantines. They set up what are known as Crusader states or Crusader kingdoms, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And just to read this timeline here, green shows a time period when at least Jerusalem is controlled by the Muslims. Red shows when Jerusalem is controlled by Western European powers or by these Crusader kingdoms, which were essentially Western European. These red dots on our timeline show when the actual Crusades occurred. So you see the first Crusade caused the change of control of Jerusalem from the Muslims to the Western European Christians. And once Jerusalem was under their control, it would continue to be under their control for roughly 90 years. And you can imagine that many pilgrims from Europe wanted to visit the holy sites in the Holy Land, especially Jerusalem, but this was not an easy journey. Not only was it a long journey, and it was, well, I think there's a map in here that will show us some of the paths. There we go. This is a long journey, by land or by sea. I don't know which was more dangerous. I would imagine traveling by land. They would have to go through multiple kingdoms in this time period to get where they're going. It could be incredibly dangerous. Many of the pilgrims were actually robbed or killed on their way to the Holy Land. So, in 1119, a small group of knights led by Hugh de Pan, we got King Baldwin II, King of Jerusalem, and what happens is they set up a Crusader state. They go to Jerusalem, which was a Crusader state, and the headquarters of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were at the Temple Mount. And King Baldwin II was the head of Jerusalem. So here is Jerusalem. They come to King Baldwin II and they tell him, this is the Patriarch, Warmond, Patriarch of Jerusalem, and they say that we would like to protect these knights led by Hugh de Pan. Said we would like to protect these pilgrims that are on their way to Jerusalem. And these guys, of course, think that it's a good idea, and that they give them some space. Actually, they give them headquarters in the Temple Mount in order to start their group. If you were to translate their name, Knights Templar, it would mean poor fellow soldiers of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. This is the Temple of Solomon, and this is where their headquarters were in Jerusalem. We shorten it to the Knights Templar. Today, this is a mosque. It's the original site of the Temple of King Solomon. This is the the logo. This is what they had on their shield, white background, red cross, but their official seal, their official logo had two knights on one horse because they were the poor fellow soldiers. This is showing just how impoverished they were. So, they were shortly thereafter recognized by the Pope, and many people started to donate money to this order, and many more people even wanted to volunteer to be Knights Templar. So over the remainder of the Crusades, they become an important institution in medieval Europe. And you see this yellow line, this shows, and even this should continue on, and we'll talk about that later. This shows when the Knights Templar were active in this area. So, okay. So, folks often associate the Knights Templar with being knights. And so you can see here, the knights are on horseback, protecting pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem. Being knights, they were also active in battle during the Crusades as well. Now we talk about knights and soldiers, and although there were 20,000 Knights Templar, there was only about 10% of them that were actual soldiers, also called warrior monks. What they did do is they created a fairly significant complex infrastructure to do multiple things to support their goals. And perhaps the most significant thing that they did is they developed a sprawling financial enterprise. If you were in London and you wanted to go do a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, you would need resources in order to do that. And you would want to have access to your wealth once you got to Jerusalem. However, you didn't want to be carrying around all these gold coins or whatever other kind of money you had. You didn't want to carry that with you on your trip because, you know, it would be heavy, but more importantly, it would be really dangerous. And so what they did is they developed one of the services that were developed by the Knights Templar was they would go to their temple in London. Getting ahead of myself here. They would deposit at a Templar bank in London, make their pilgrimage, come to the Templar bank in Jerusalem, and take some of their money out. So, go there, give your note to the Knights, and get your money. So this is something that we take for granted today because, I can go to any ATM pretty much anywhere in the world, and for the most part, I can put in my card and get access to money that I have in my account. But there's a lot of infrastructure that is behind that makes that happen. Today we have telecommunications, we have satellites that help information go back and forth, and we have servers to keep track of all the data. They didn't have that in the Middle Ages, so you can imagine that this is a very powerful idea that I could deposit money one place and then I could withdraw it someplace else. And we still don't fully understand how the Knights were able to pull this off. It requires a lot of trust. And how were they able to authenticate the notes of credit at any of these points? I don't know. Not only did they do this type of deposit and withdrawal in multiple locations, is they had these deposits and people were also donating money to them to support their cause. So they were able to provide loans, and oftentimes they provided loans to very powerful individuals like kings and nobility. They were often brokers in major transactions. And this is why historians do consider them perhaps the first true international banks. In the other videos, we talked about how in 1187, Saladin is able to retake Jerusalem. But then in the Sixth Crusade and the Barons' Crusades, we're here and here. control of Jerusalem goes back to the Christians. But in 1244, it's taken back by the Muslims again, and it stays under Muslim control until the end of World War I. And so with Jerusalem taken in 1244, the whole goal of the Knights Templar, the whole purpose of their existence, starts to become less important. Although at this point they are a significant and influential financial institution. Now, as that King Solomon's temple was built into a mosque after the Muslims regained control of Jerusalem, it's believed that the Knights Templar still used that as their headquarters. And so therefore they were in regular contact with Muslim people. So okay, oh boy. All right, back to another King Philippe of France. This one is Philip IV. Philip IV incurred a great deal of debt. He was the king of France. He amassed a lot of debt, and a lot of that money he had borrowed belonged to the Knights Templar. So here is a powerful guy looking for solutions to his debt situation, and he realizes that one solution is maybe just to arrest the people who you owe money to. And then not only do you not owe any money to them, you can take whatever they have. And Philip IV does exactly that. Famously, on a Friday the 13th in 1307, he arrests many Knights Templar, including the Grand Master, the leader of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay. He tortures them. He eventually gets them to confess to a whole bunch of things, but then they retract their confession, and they're not willing to retract the retraction. Got that? So in 1314, Jacques de Molay and other knights are burned at the stake in Paris. And so this is considered the end of the Knights Templar, although there are many legends of how they have continued on, perhaps in secrecy. So the Knights Templar are to this day a subject of fascination. Many legends associated with them, but one of their biggest historical contributions that isn't often talked about, but we know happened, is that they really laid the foundation for what we today consider to be the modern international banking institutions.